right, let me set the scene for you. You're at 14,000 feet high elevation, and suddenly your stomach starts to churn. Like, at first you think it's nothing. Maybe you ate something funky. But then you start to feel dizzy, you feel weak. And the mountain is both beautiful and terrifying above you at the same time. And there's no road, no car, no Uber, no way out of this except on your own 2 feet. And every step is exhausting. And what's worse is that your guy now leans in, and he's local, and he tells you the one thing that you've been terrified to hear since you started this trip. He says, "My friend, this is altitude sickness. You could die up here. You need a helicopter right now." But what he doesn't tell you is that an hour ago at breakfast, he sprinkled in some baking soda into your eggs. And what he really doesn't tell you is that the helicopter is about to charge your insurance company $25,000. And he gets a cut. Babe, we're going to Mount Everest today. Now, we are talking about how the cleanest air on Earth is hiding one of the most dirtiest insurance scams in the world. How a journalist tried to blow the whistle on this, had the receipts, posted them everywhere, but gets steamrolled by a government that needed the tourism money too badly to care. And how a youth revolution in September 2025 burned down a building that had stood for over 100 years, brought down a prime minister, and how out of those literal ashes finally came the indictments. We're going to get into it today with all the dirty receipts from the Mount Everest rescue scam. 32 charged, 1,243 pages of evidence, hundreds of forged documents, multiple hospitals, multiple helicopter companies. So sit down for this. This is a $20 million in fraudulent insurance claims. So before we get into this scam, I have to set the stage, because if you don't understand the stage, you're not going to understand why this has happened. You're going to think like it's just some bad people that did some bad things. No. This is not just a few bad apples situation. This is the whole orchard is on fire situation. And to understand why the orchard is on fire, we have to talk about Nepal. And now here's the part that matters. Nepal is also one of the poorest countries in Asia. The average GDP per capita is about $1,336 a year per person. So to put that in perspective, that's less than what some of you guys spent on Stanley Cups in 2024. That's the entire annual economic output of an average Nepali citizen. So tourism is everything in Nepal. Tourism is the economy. About 1.2 million people visit every year, and about 300,000 of those go trekking in the high Himalayas, Everest Base Camp, Annapurna, Langtang. Those are the most picturesque trails on Earth. And tourism accounts for about 3% of Nepal's entire GDP. And that might sound really small, but in a country of this size, 3% of the GDP is the difference between feeding your family and not feeding your family. It's the difference between sending your kids to school and not being able to afford to send them to school. So it's that critical. Now, I need you to hold those two facts in your head at the same time, because they're going to be the engine of this entire story. That this is one of the poorest countries in Asia, but the people coming to visit are some of the richest people in the world. Like, the average trekker on Everest Base Camp is dropping $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on this one trip. They're at the Marriott in Kathmandu before they started the trek. They've got the North Face gear, they've got the Garmin watch, they've got the GoPro, they've got the sat phone, and they've got the InReach. They've got the travel insurance. And this is the most important part. They've got good travel insurance, the kind that covers emergency helicopter evacuation from high altitudes. Because, real talk, high altitude can kill you. People do die on Everest. People do get altitude sickness. People do, in fact, need to be rescued. So this insurance, it's there for a reason. It exists for a reason. A legitimate emergency helicopter rescue from base camp to Kathmandu, when it's done correctly, when the helicopter operator is actually honest, and when the hospital is actually honest about it, costs about $2,500 to $4,000. That's the real number. That's the actual cost. But the fraudulent rescue billed through a specific hospital with the right paperwork to a Western insurance that has never even seen Nepal and has no way to verify what's actually happened at 15,000 feet, that can set you back $10,000, $20,000, maybe even $30,000 per patient. And that's if you can even put 4 patients on one flight and then bill them all separately. Babe, I mean, you do the math. And here's where I want to pause because I want to be so clear about something. Most of the guides in Nepal are actually good people. Most of them. The Sherpas have earned that respect 1,000 times over. And these people are some of the most skilled, brave, hardworking people on the planet. They are not the villains of this story. But when you have desperate economic pressure on one side and a massive cash machine just sitting there in the form of Western insurance dollars on the other, and basically zero meaningful oversight in between, you get a problem. You get a really, really, really big problem. You get a problem that operates for nearly a decade. You get a problem that international journalists try to expose, but the government buries it. You get a problem that produces over $20 million in fraudulent claims, 4,782 affected climbers, and over 300 fake rescues. You get the Mt Everest of insurance scams. So let's get into it. Okay, so according to Nepal's Central Investigation Bureau, the CIB, which is basically their FBI, here's how the whole thing works. And I want to be so clear. Everything I'm about to tell you is per the official charge sheet, the actual filed document. 1,243 pages of it currently sitting in Kathmandu District Court right now. So there are 2 flavors of this scam. The first flavor is the consensual con. This is the most common version, okay? So picture this. You are a trekker, you made it to Everest Base Camp, you got the photo, you got the Instagram content, the reel's about to pop off when you post, but you're exhausted. Like the kind of exhausted where every muscle in your body is screaming. And you have days of walking ahead of you just to get back down. Your feet are completely destroyed, your shoulders hurt from your pack, your sunburn is peeling, and you just don't want to do it anymore. I mean, you've already got the gram. What's the point? And your guide leans over and says, "My friend, you know what? If you just say you don't feel well, just say it. I can call a helicopter. It's free. Your insurance pays. No problem. We can tell them it's altitude sickness. They pick you up. You're in Kathmandu by dinner." And honestly, a lot of trekkers just say yes. Some of them know exactly what's happening. Some of them, allegedly, are in on it. And you want proof of that? Babe, the insurance investigators found a WhatsApp chat between a German trekker and a helicopter company executive. The German wasn't even complaining about being defrauded. He wasn't complaining about being scammed. He was complaining that they charged him twice for the same rescue. Like, sir, you're in on the scam. The helicopter company executive allegedly wrote back like, "Oh yeah, my bad, a duplicate charge may have occurred. Here's your refund. Sorry for the confusion, bro." The poetry of that. Like the absolute poetry. A scammer apologizing to a co-scammer for over scamming the insurance company that they're both scamming together. So that's a Greek tragedy right there. That's Shakespearean. All right, flavor two. And this is where it gets a little dark. The investigators claim that some guides went further than just suggesting a fake rescue. Some of them induced the illness themselves. So there's two methods, according to the police investigation. Method one, lacing food with baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. In large quantities, it can cause severe gastrointestinal distress, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. We're talking the kinds of symptoms that at 14,000 feet, in a panicked first-time trekker who has never been to that kind of altitude before, it can absolutely look like altitude sickness or food poisoning. Method two, Diamox. Now, Diamox is a medication that is actually supposed to help with altitude sickness. It's supposed to help your body acclimate. It's a real drug with a real purpose. But investigators say that some guides gave trekkers Diamox combined with massive amounts of water deliberately to trigger symptoms that looked like the emergency the drug is supposed to prevent. So picture it. You're at altitude, you are now genuinely sick, either because your food was tampered with, or because you're dehydrated and disoriented from a drug, or because the guide has basically scared you into believing you're about to die in the death zone. And the guide is just there whispering, "Hey, my friend, you need a helicopter now. You could die. You consent." So of course you consent. Like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to argue with the local expert? Okay, so a trekker is sick. The guide calls in the rescue. A helicopter comes, picks them up, flies them to Kathmandu, drops them off at the hospital. And up to this point, this looks like a normal medical evacuation. But the question is, where does the fraud actually happen? Where does the money get split? How does the whole thing work? So, babe, this is where it gets honestly kind of impressive in the worst possible way. Like, this is criminal architecture right here. Whoever designed this scheme had a real vision. The CIB investigation identifies 4 Kathmandu hospitals as central to the alleged scheme: Swakon International, Era Health Central, CIWEC, and Vayoda. And 3 helicopter companies, Heli Everest plus others, plus dozens of trekking agencies feeding the network. And now here's the kickback structure investigators described. And it's so brazen, it's almost beautiful. The hospital gets the insurance payout from the Western Insurance Company. So far, normal. But then the hospital pays 20 to 25% of that payout back to the trekking company that sent them the patient, pays another 20 to 25% back to the helicopter operator. And the guy who started this whole thing gets his personal commission check. And the trekker, the actual sick person whose body started this entire supply chain, they get discharged in under an hour. Sometimes they don't even get admitted. They just walk out. The hospital then files paperwork as if they stayed there for days. A UK-based insurance company official told the Kathmandu Post, and I have to read this quote directly, "Most tourists later said that they did not even stay in the hospital for an hour. Not a day, not overnight, not even for an IV, not for observation, an hour. That's it." So now let me give you the actual dollar amounts because numbers make it real. Sridhai International got 1.2 million. Mountain Rescue Service, which is one helicopter company, allegedly carried out 172 fraudulent rescues. raked in over $10 million. Nepal charter service, $8.2 million. All from scamming Western insurance companies over Western tourists by making them sick. But the best example, the one that genuinely makes me laugh, is that investigators found 4 hikers who took one helicopter, one flight, together from Lukla to Kathmandu. The legitimate cost of that flight, like when you charter the helicopter like a taxi, is about $2,500. But the helicopter company allegedly billed each of the 4 insurance companies separately, as if each hiker had been the sole passenger on an emergency rescue flight. So the total bill? $31,000 for the same flight. The exact same flight. So that's not insurance fraud, that's Uber pool. But you charge each rider as if they have their own private limousine. And the documents? All right, sit down for this because I cannot genuinely believe what I'm about to say. The investigators found forged medical records, forged hospital admission papers, forged discharge summaries, forged x-rays, and like standard forged fraud stuff, right? But in one case, detailed in the actual charge sheet, a hospital employee admitted under questioning that he had used his own year-old personal x-ray report to fabricate medical records for foreign trekkers. So basically, somewhere out there in a filing cabinet at a Western insurance company is this Nepali hospital worker's reused x-ray from over a year ago of his chest filed as if it were the trekker's chest. The trekker doesn't know. The insurance company doesn't know. The x-ray is just out there living its best life, being multiple people simultaneously. And the investigators also found 9 doctors who say that their digital signatures were also lifted off of a hospital database and forged onto discharge papers for patients they had never even seen. 9 doctors, like real doctors going about their lives, their signatures just showing up on documents about treatments they didn't provide for patients they didn't know. So this is not amateur hours. This is sophisticated. This is a criminal enterprise. This is the kind of operations that you write thrillers about. And it was operating openly in one of the most photographed places on Earth, with thousands of Western tourists walking through every season for years. Okay, so let's talk about the trekkers, because this is real and it's happening to real people who saved up for this trip of a lifetime. We have 2 Canadian trekkers, their names withheld for privacy's sake, who proactively filed a formal complaint with the CIB. They say they were pressured into a fraudulent medical evacuation during their trip in November. They reached out to Nepali authorities themselves, and they were like, something happened to us. This wasn't right, and we need to report this. Their complaint is part of what opened this entire investigation. And then we have an Australian trekker talking to a journalist who said, I only had a cold, and my guide insisted on a helicopter evacuation for me. A cold. The girl literally had a sniffle, and she was being pressured onto an emergency helicopter for an evac that would be billed at $25,000 to her insurance company. But here's the quote that I have not been able to stop thinking about. A helicopter pilot, in a confession reported by the Nepal-based travel writer, admitted that across an entire year of flights, he only had transported 3 people who were actually sick. 3. In an entire year of doing rescue flights, only 3 real emergencies. The rest? Allegedly all part of the scheme. So that's not a few bad apples, that's the whole orchard. And listen, I've been scrolling TripAdvisor reviews on Everest Base Camp treks, and I wanted to give you a vibe check because the smoke from this fire has been visible for years. One trekker wrote about a trip where she watched an inexperienced hiker in her group get flown out by helicopter, quote, for no clear reason. But during that same trek, a different group, another hiker, actually died from altitude sickness. He actually died. But when his real rescue helicopter arrived, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't want to misquote her, she said no medics were on board, and her group had to carry the body and load him onto the helicopter themselves. Her blood was boiling because she's standing there witnessing a real emergency being treated like an afterthought, while simultaneously around her, helicopters are touching down left and right constantly for what she suspected weren't real emergencies at all. So that juxtaposition, that right there, that's the sick part of this whole thing. The fake rescues weren't just stealing from insurance companies, they were taking helicopters and pilots and resources away from people who were actually dying, people with actual altitude sickness, people having actual heart attacks at 17,000 feet. The medical evacuation system that's supposed to save lives was allegedly being hoarded for fraud. And now there's a forum on TripAdvisor that's been going on since 2018. The title is literally Helicopter Rescue Scam Nepal. People are warning each other, telling each other to research their guides, telling each other to read the fine print on their insurance claim, telling each other to push back if a guide insists on a helicopter. So the collective knowledge has been out there for years, but the problem wasn't that people didn't know. The problem was that nobody official was doing anything about it. Which brings us to my next point. In 2018, an AFP journalist named Annabelle Symington started pulling on this thread. She read TripAdvisor reviews and she interviewed trekkers. She even posed as a hiking client herself and went to Everest Base Camp. And she found a young woman waiting for a helicopter rescue who, according to Symington, admitted she didn't even actually needed it. The Symington investigation broke big. International insurers threatened to stop covering Nepal completely. The Nepal Ministry of Culture, Tourism, and Civil Aviation announced an investigation, and they formed a government committee. A committee. And this is the wild part. This committee produced a 700-page report documenting widespread fraud across helicopter companies, hospitals, and trekking agencies. And this was back in 2018, so what happened? Babe, almost nothing. The tourism minister at the time, his name was Rabindra Adhikari, went on record complaining about, quote, continued leaks to the international press. So he basically framed the whole problem as a PR crisis. Like, the issue wasn't even fraud. The issue was that people were finding out about the fraud. He said that helicopter rescues had already been dropping. He framed concerned international insurers as the threat to Nepal's tourism industry, not the alleged fraud itself. And that 700-page report? Buried. The recommendations? Watered down. The 15 companies identified as involved in the fraudulent rescues? Quote, unspecified legal action was proposed. That's the actual phrasing. Unspecified. No one was charged, no company was shut down, operations continued. And the fraud not only continued, it grew. In the years between 2018 and 2025, while the official position of the government was, we're handling it, the racket allegedly expanded. New hospitals joined, new helicopter operators joined, the infrastructure became more sophisticated. The kickback percentages stabilized. The foraging operations got better for 7 years. 7. This kept happening to real trekkers with real insurance bills with real consequences. So while that 700-page government report sat in a drawer somewhere in Kathmandu collecting dust, if this story ended here, it would already be wild. But it doesn't end here. It gets bigger. So this is where the story becomes something else entirely. In September of 2025, Nepal, The Nepali government, the country with one of the lowest GDPs per capita in Asia, where the wealthiest 10% earn more than 3 times what the poorest 40% make and control 26 times more wealth, that government tries to ban 26 social media platforms. Facebook, X, WhatsApp, TikTok, Instagram, all of it gone overnight. The stated reason was that something about regulation and content moderation. But the actual reason that everybody understood was that these platforms had become the place where young Nepalese were organizing protests against the systemic corruption, where they were exposing government insiders profiting off of public funds, where they were sharing stories about elite excess in a country where most people couldn't afford healthcare. The platforms had become a problem. So the government wanted to make the platforms just disappear, not exist. The platform ban dropped, and the country went up in flames. In September 2025, young protesters showed up at the gates of parliament in Kathmandu. Security forces opened fire. 19 young people were killed that day, just in front of parliament. By the time the wave of protests was over, the official death toll was 72. 72 young people dead. Singha Durbar, the main administrative building of the Nepali government, which is a colonial-era palace that had served at the seat of power for over a century, was set on fire, and it burned. The government collapsed. The prime minister resigned. Parliament was dissolved. An extra-constitutional caretaker government took over. The platform ban was suddenly reversed. And then suddenly, in the smoldering aftermath of a literal revolution, cases that had been sitting in drawers for years started to move. And this is the political backdrop for what happened next. In late November 2025, the Central Investigation Bureau formally reopened the helicopter rescue fraud case. In January 2026, 6 executives from 3 rescue agencies were arrested. By February, a court had ordered them to be held in custody. And by March, 32 people had been charged. The 1,243-page charge sheet was filed in Kathmandu District Court, where it contained WhatsApp messages, CCTV footage, confessions, and forged X-rays. And I cannot stress this enough. This case had been ready to file for years. The 700-page report from 2018 was the foundation. The Kathmandu Post had been publishing details for years. The international insurers had been screaming about it. The trekkers had been complaining on TripAdvisor. The infrastructure of prosecution had all existed. But what had been missing was political will. And it took a youth uprising, 72 dead protesters, a burned government building, and a fallen prime minister to create that will. So this is not just a story about fraud. It is a story about who gets prosecuted in this world, and when, and why. About a system that protects itself until it can't anymore. And in the end, justice in this case didn't come from the legal system just grinding forward methodically, like trust in the legal system. No. It came because Nepal had a revolution. And as of now, 10 of the 32 defendants have been arrested. 22 are what the Nepali legal language calls absconding, which is just a fancy way of saying, you don't know where they are, they're gone. Maybe they're out of the country. Maybe they're hiding in the mountains. Maybe they're in a Marriott in Dubai. Who knows? The defendants, who are in custody, face the offenses against the national interest designation, which sounds like Cold War language, but in modern Nepal, it carries real teeth. Court proceedings are underway. International insurance companies are still threatening to pull out of Nepal entirely. And multiple insurers are demanding a new verification protocol and significantly higher premiums for any high-altitude coverage in the country. So the trekking industry is in crisis. The good operators, and now there are still so many good operators, they're also being tarred by association with the bad ones. Nepal's reputation as a tourism destination is taking a real hit, which is genuinely terrible for the people who actually depend on tourism to feed their families, who had absolutely nothing to do with this scam, who are literally just trying to do their jobs. So when a country's entire economy depends on Western insurance dollars flowing through emergency services, the incentives can get really ugly really fast. The system, supposed to save lives, became a money laundering operation. The pipeline, supposed to deliver medical care, became a fraud delivery vehicle. And it took years for the official system to even admit this was happening, let alone act on it. But for now, 32 charged, 20 million in fraud. The trial proceedings are underway in Kathmandu District Court right now. But will the political will hold? Because Nepal has done this before. They've had a moment of accountability, and then they've forgotten. So let's see if this time is going to be different.